Hello there, it's Juliana and welcome back to the channel. In this video, I'm going to be sharing something extra special with you. Tim Holtz just released a surprise Easter stamp set called Mr. Rabbit. This dapper fellow here is similar in size to the Professor 2 stamp set image, and he's paired with this really cool distressed plaid and these dots and then some Easter ephemera. And of course, this set has all the vintage vibes that I absolutely love. And as soon as I saw it, I immediately had ideas on what I wanted to create and share with it. So throughout this video, I'm going to be sharing some great techniques that anyone can do using Distress Oxide inks and Distress watercolor pencils. These are the supplies I'm going to be working with for this card. So I'm going to be working with the Mr. Rabbit stamp set and the Etcetera stamp set, in particular this ledger stamp. Watercolor paper, so any kind of watercolor paper would work. Just a paper towel or some kind of rag. Distress Oxide inks, the colors I'm going to be working with are Frayed Burlap, Salvage Patina, Abandoned Coral, and Mowed Lawn. I'm also going to be working with Distress watercolor pencils in Frayed Burlap, Gathered Twigs, Broken China, Uncharted Mariner, Hickory Smoke, Walnut Stains, and Spun Sugar. And then I'm going to be using a water brush, but you could also use a paintbrush. And I'll have a distress sprayer and then my heat tool. And the other thing you're going to want as well is some sort of stamping platform. As always, I encourage you to use your stash as you follow along with me, but if you're interested in any of the supplies that I've mentioned or used in the video, you can find a link to those in the description box below. And if you make a purchase using that link, you are supporting me and helping me continue to be able to provide you with all the content I share, and I really, really appreciate that. Now let's get on with the making. So to start with, for the background, I'm going to be working with a piece of Distress watercolor cardstock on the smooth side. So any kind of watercolor cardstock would work. And I'm going to be using the Mr. Rabbit stamp set, which is the new stamp set from Tim Holtz and Stampers Anonymous. I'm in love. That's all I can say. In love. And I'm also going to be using the Etcetera stamp set, specifically this kind of ledger stamp. So again, any stamp set will work for the techniques that I'm going to be sharing in this video. So don't feel that you need these exact stamp sets. I would recommend some sort of stamping platform because we're going to be doing some repeat stamping. So you're going to want to be able to stamp in the same place more than once. And then I'm going to be working with Distress Oxide inks, and the colors I'm going to be working with are Abandoned Coral, Mowed Lawn, Frayed Burlap, and Broken China. And as far as colors go, any color you would like, but the techniques I'm going to be sharing are specific to Distress Oxide inks. You might get a similar-ish effect with regular Distress inks or a dye ink, but not exactly the same. So, all right, so to get started here, I'm gonna get my paper into my stamping platform, and I always kind of like to position this so that it won't move around on me, kind of in the center, and then that lets me stamp like off of any of the edges if I want to. So I put a little bit of repositionable adhesive. This is from scrapbook.com. I put that on the back side. And then I like to make some little pencil marks here on the paper. This is just a piece of black cardstock that I keep in my stamping platform. And then if I do need to pick up my paper, I can put it back in and kind of line it up with those corner pieces. So to start with, I'm just gonna take this kind of plaid stamp here, and I'm just gonna position it here, kind of letting it hang over a little bit off the edge. And I'm going to kind of scoot it over just a hair bit. I do want it straight. There we go. And I'm going to stamp that with the Mowed Lawn. Going to stamp that image. And then while that ink is still wet, you're going to just take your paper towel or a soft rag and just kind of lightly smear that ink while it's still wet. And now I'm going to spritz that stamp with some water, just one little spritz, and stamp again. So you're getting a combination of the stamp and smudge with a little bit of kind of a watercolor effect. So if you want the water to, to be a little bit more, you can always give it another spritz and stamp again. And then there you can see how that image kind of gets that watercolory effect. So then you're just gonna peel off the stamp. And the big thing I would recommend is to make sure that you kind of dry off your stamping platform after you've misted, because the stamps don't want to stick on this when it's wet. So, all right, so now we're going to go down and I'm going to stamp a little bit of this green, same image, over on this bottom corner here. So we're just going to kind of repeat that same process. There was still some ink on there, but I'm going to ink it back up again so I get another, so I can do the smudging. And take that paper towel, rub over it, and then give that a little squirt. There we go. Okay. Next, I'm going to take the polka dot stamp, and I'm going to do that same thing here. Gonna position that one there. And I forgot to dry off my Misty. I'm just gonna. And then for this image, I'm going to be using the Abandoned Coral. And we're going to do the same little smudgeroo. And then get the mist, stamp again. Like I said, if you want, you can kind of stamp and go like however many times you want there. And then get some of that extra ink off before I position up here. And then I'm just going to do a little bit of it up here. And what I'm doing here is just kind of getting, so I'm repeating that color in a couple sections so that it kind of draws your eye across the card here. So by doing it up in the corners here and then the lower corner there, you get that, kind of get that little bit of a diagonal eye draw. And get that little mist. There we go. And next, I'm going to stamp this cool advertisement image. And the same thing with this one. And I'm just going to go ahead and position both of these on here. And it's not very straight. Goodness. There we go. All right, and then for these images, I'm going to use a Frayed Burlap. And you can see you can kind of do both of them at the same time here if you like, or you can do one at a time. And when I'm going with this, I've been using this same rag over and over. Just make sure you're using a dry section when you're doing this smudging part, and not one of the wet ones from when you've been spraying or drying up the spray. Get a little bit more on there. There we go. All right. And then I'm going to lastly stamp that ledger script, but I'm going to just dry this just a little bit. There's a few little spots here that are still wet. So I'm just going to dry those. You can also just dab them off with your paper towel if you like. And again, as you can see for this one, so for this one, I'm going to use the broken china. And just going to smudge that one. Give that a little spritz. One more. And then, so as you can see here, I'm kind of repeating colors and going across from each other with them. Again, just to kind of get that repeat, but draw your eye across the background. So last one here, I'm just going to put right here. And with the broken china. Give that a little smudge and then a little spritz. And there we are. So there is a look at the finished stamping that we've done for the background. So now we're going to move on to stamping Mr. Rabbit. I've got another piece of Distress watercolor cardstock, and I'm going to be working on the smooth side. And you definitely want watercolor cardstock for this because we're going to be working with the Distress watercolor pencils. But you could also use any kind of watercolor pencils you have. You could use dye inks, Distress inks to do the watercoloring, anything, you know, that you've got to work with that you could get like a watercoloring effect. Or if you don't want to watercolor, you could also just use like colored pencils, or you could use Copic markers or whatever you want to color in the image. But this is what I'm going to be using. And then I also have a water brush, but you could also use a paintbrush and just some water. And to stamp the image, I'm going to stamp it using Archival ink in black soot. That's the color. And you just want some sort of waterproof permanent ink because you're going to be coloring in with the pencils in the water. So you just don't want something that's going to run and bleed. And so you're going to just stamp that image in there. And there we are. And then we're going to leave the image in the stamping platform. So before this technique, you definitely want to use some sort of stamping platform, because once we start coloring this image in with these watercolor pencils specifically, I can speak to these. I can't say to other mediums other than regular colored pencils. that the pigment will build up on top of the ink and start kind of muting it. So we're going to color it, and then you're going to re-stamp the image, and you'll see how it kind of pops it back to life. So we're gonna get myself a little extra paper towel here. And now I'm just gonna start coloring in the rabbit. And the colors I'm working with here, I'll try to remember as I'm going along. This one here is Broken China. And I like to kind of start with the darker areas on the image and put the color to those first, and like where the shadow would be. And with this kind of a image in particular, you can kind of, the stamp itself already has like the shadows for you, like where it's darker and the lines on this like engraved style are closer together. That gives you an idea of where the shadows are. And so that's kind of where I like to put the pigment down first, and then kind of blend it out from there with the water to fill in the rest of the area. And then you can just kind of add a little bit more if you need to. If you get too much on there, and you can kind of just add a little bit more water and spread it out. So I'll let that dry, and you can just kind of keep, I like to keep the colored pencils on a paper towel so that that can kind of absorb any of the excess color or pigment that comes off. And I prefer to kind of color off of, like pull the pigment like you saw me doing off of the crayon or off of the pencil. And I just feel like I have a little bit more control with it that way. So I'm gonna just dry that here before I go to the next color. And now what I'm gonna do is add a little bit of Uncharted Mariner. So this is just a little darker blue, and I'm gonna use that to get in here and darken up some of these shadow areas a little bit more even. Then I can kind of blend that out as well. Now you can also use these to color. So like if you wanted to put some darker color into here, you can just color straight to the paper. Kind of put some of that pencil down, that pigment down where you want it to be a little darker. And then go back in with your pencil or your water brush or your paintbrush, and then just kind of blend that out. That's just kind of a choice thing as far as how you want to apply the color. I just kind of like the effect I get better when I pull it off of the pencil. Okay, so now we'll move on to the bow tie. You can kind of paint in any order. The big thing you just want to remember when you're doing this is if you color next to each other, you want to make sure that area is dry before you add that next color, because otherwise it's more likely to bleed into that area, and you might not be what you're looking for. So for me, I'm wanting this area to be abandoned coral and that to be the Broken China and Uncharted Mariner. Again, I'm just trying to put that pigment where where it's darker, have more color, and then use the water to kind of blend it out to create the highlights. Now let's go on to the rabbit, and for that I'm going to be working with frayed burlap, gathered twigs, and walnut stain to kind of create some variations in the coloring and shadows and stuff with a rabbit. But you could certainly you know, even just do this all with one color if you like. So here I'm just applying the frayed burlap first and putting that in the areas where it's kind of the lighter shadow areas here on our rabbit. And again, if you get out of the lines, don't worry about that. Don't freak your freak, as Tim likes to say. It's all good. We're going to be cutting him out, so it's fine if you go outside the lines here. And again, I'm just using those lines from the design of the stamp to kind of help guide where it's lighter and darker. So where it's, you know, has less lines or is more open, I'm going to definitely want to do the lighter color, and then now kind of going back in to some of these areas where it's a little darker, and now I'm adding in the gathered twigs. And you know, when you're coloring this at home, feel free to turn this if you need to get a better angle. I'm just trying to stay in frame here for you guys while I'm doing this. All right, now I'm gonna go in and add some of that walnut stain. And here I'm gonna definitely I wanna get that along this edge here between the, like his shirt collar. And kind of under his chin. And kind of around his little mouth area, and then kind of here on those areas on the ear here where it's definitely darker. And you know, you can just kind of go back and forth and just, you know, add more color here and there as you like. Now I'm just going to kind of tap off and get most of the color off, and then I'm going to kind of go through and kind of fill in some of these so it's not completely white, and then kind of just blend out things a little bit more. Get a little bit more color here on his nose. And then blend that out. All right, so we'll set these to the side, and now I'm gonna color in his ears, and for that I'm using sponge sugar. You just kind of have to get these kind of wet, and then once you get them a little bit of wet going on there, then it kind of gets that pigment loosened up, and then you can grab it a lot easier. Sometimes it doesn't want to come off right away. Now I'm going to give this a little dry here. I want to go back in and add a little more darkness to that ear here for the shadows. Alright, so then the last thing we're going to do here is we're just going to add a little bit of some shadows to his shirt, which I'm going to keep white. So I'm just going to use some hickory smoke and just kind of apply it along the shadow and edges here, where it kind of shows that there would be a shadow. Okay, so from at this point now, you want to just kind of give another like look over, you know, do you want to make anything darker? I think I want to add a little bit more darkness to his bow tie. And when you add another layer, that will, you know, that definitely adds more pigment, so it's going to darken up everything. So you don't want to do any more coloring once you re-stamp the image, unless you want to stamp it again, because you're just going to have to kind of redo everything. So, excuse me. I kind of recommend trying to take a, you know, step back at it and really look and see if you like how it looks at this point, so that you don't have to stamp it again. All right. That looks pretty good. I'm happy with that now. Maybe add a little bit more. A little more Uncharted Mariner over here. So if you do get a little area like I did there, where it's kind of bled out, if you're getting color into an area where you don't want it, you can just kind of take a paper towel and re-wet it and then dab it and kind of pick it up usually to save it. All right, so now we are going to, now that I'm finished coloring, and what I'm gonna do now is re-ink the stamp, and we're gonna stamp him again. And then, like, isn't it amazing how he just like pops back to life with that second stamped layer? And if you want, you know, depending on how fresh and juicy your stamp is, you might want to even stamp it one more time, just to really get a nice dark impression. And like, look at that, like that is just, love it, huh? Isn't that awesome? So at this point, that we're finished with the watercoloring, you're going to let this dry, or you can use your heat tool to dry it. And then I'm going to fussy cut it with some scissors, and we're going to layer it onto that background that we made. All right, so yes, this would be like totally fine to use just as is, but we made that background, so I want to have him show up on there. So now I'm just going to take my scissors and cut out around the image, and I am not going to worry about the whiskers. I'm not going to try to cut out the whiskers. I'm going to cut them off, and I will show you how we're going to get them back in the next step. So don't worry about that. And then for the edge here, I'm just going to tear this instead of cutting it. So just going to kind of tear it along there. Next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to ink the edges of the area where I cut it with just a little bit of Frayed Burlap Oxide ink, and it's just a personal preference of mine. I don't know why. I don't like the white edges showing, so I almost always I like to ink the edges when I fussy cut stuff. And if you want to get a little bit in on him, you can. Just add a little bit, some more shading. So there is a look at our finished Mr. Rabbit. Now we're going to go back to that background piece, and he's going to be here in the middle. I'm going to clean this off so I don't get any of that ink transferring onto my background. And then I'm going to magnets, make sure that's where I want it to be, and then we're going to position him where I want him to be, and then we're going to stamp him again, and then that way I'll have the whiskers back. So put him right there, kind of in the center. And in fact, I mean, you don't really need to worry about stamping the entire image. You want to just put a little ink like I did there where the whiskers are, because the rest of it's going to be covered up. So it's not super necessary. But you can if you want. So I'm going to do it just so you can kind of see the difference there. But yeah, so he's just going to go right on top of that. And then I am going to take a little bit of Frayed Burlap and this little mini blending tool, and I'm just going to ink the edges just a little bit here. I don't know why, I just have this weird thing with the white edges when I've colored something, so. I'm gonna leave it on the torn bottom part, but I'm gonna leave that white, but. Okay, and then, yeah, so there he is, and then, I'm going to assemble him. I'm going to add some foam adhesive to pop him up, and then a little sentiment, and I'll show you the finished card here next. Here's a look at the finished card. Mr. Rabbit really is quite dapper, isn't he? I love the thought of doing this same design with maybe even more pastel colors. Like, imagine using bundled sage, spun sugar, and speckled egg for the colors, and then coloring him in with speckled egg and spun sugar. You could even add a pop of color with squeezed lemonade instead of the pink. Just some ideas there on some other color options. To finish off the card, I added some machine stitching around the outer edge and layered it onto a piece of craft cardstock that I just inked with Frayed Burlap Distress Oxide ink. And then for the sentiment, I used my vintage typewriter to type out Happy Easter, and then just cut that into a little strip and adhered it to the card. Well, I hope you enjoyed this bit of inspiration using the new Mr. Rabbit stamp set from Tim Holtz, and I cannot wait to see how you are inspired to create with this stamp set. Until next time, stay crafty, my friend. Thanks so much for watching. Don't forget to hit the subscribe button so you can join me on a more regular basis. Hit the like if you enjoyed this video, and if you want to join me on my other social media platforms, you can find the links to those in the description box below. Also, feel free to leave me a comment if you have any questions or if there's something you'd love to share with me and our community. I'll see you in the comments below and in the next video.